today's episode of Fireside Chats on tech, privacy, and AI. I'm your host, Shashwat Jindal, and we are diving deep into one of the hottest topics in SaaS today, cross border privacy compliance. Joining me are two brilliant minds, Zafrul, Privacy Counsel with hands on GDPR battlefield experience, and Chetandeep, a global DPO navigating Canadian, US, and European laws daily. Everyone, let's just jump in. I will begin by giving an introduction to Zafrul. So, Zafrul is the founder of Compliance Savvy and is a privacy and compliant manager at Trovers and Hamlins. He is a seasoned GRC and data privacy expert. Zafrul combines deep experience in ISO 27001 implementation, fintech, SaaS, GDPR, and AI governance, vendor risk management, and security analysis. In addition to his role at Trovers and Hamlins, he has worked with a lot of different businesses and provided amazing things to his clients and really is a gem in the world of privacy. Now I move on to Chetandeep Singh Batra, who is a global DPO and privacy leader. Chetandeep is a globally recognized privacy professional and is also serving as chair of the IAPP New Delhi chapter. He is also an ISO 27001 lead implementator. He's a tech lawyer, accomplished speaker, and author of three books. His recent thesis on IoT privacy, along with ongoing insights into cross border compliance and AI governance, make him a go to expert for SaaS companies expanding across Canada, US, and beyond. Welcome to the show, Chetan and Zafrul.
Thank you, Shashwat. Hi, everyone.
And now I will pose my first question, which is addressed to Zafrul. So, Zafrul, the GDPR is often considered the global gold standard in privacy regulation. But in your experience, what aspects do SaaS companies frequently misunderstand or fail to implement correctly?
Cool. Thanks, Shashwat. Interesting question. So that's right. When it comes to GDPR, I think it's the daddy of data privacy laws around the world. It started the whole movement of data protection. Where does my data go? What do companies do with my data? So it's widely, you're right to say, it's widely considered as a global standard when it comes to data protection. We've seen Californian laws being based on GDPR, the Singaporean law as well, now the PDPL most recently in the Middle East. So I think the reason is quite comprehensive and is being marked as a gold standard is the emphasis it has on the individual right. So when you break down the legislation, you see prioritizes kind of the rights of individual data subjects when it comes to control over the data. For example, they have a right to make a data subject access request, and the GDPR imposes a limit, a time limit for company to respond, or they can get fined for it, or the right to erasure, etc. So there is that kind of aspect of giving control over data for individual. And to come to your question about the aspect of GDPR where SaaS companies under implement, I would say, or even some misunderstand, I would say is data minimization. With data minimization, the principle is you have to take data which you need as part of a transaction. So the agreement you've got with the individual is you need to take the data you need. You can't take more data that's needed. And previously, like historically, what's happened is companies used to collect a lot of data. It could be, for example, for marketing purposes, or company wanted to understand customer behavior. So that's why we, before GDPR, we collected a lot of data and used that data in different ways. When GDPR came in, it kind of limited or restricted the use of the collection of that data and how it would be used. And the other aspect as well is that you've got different aspects. You've got data privacy by data by design, privacy by design. You've got obtaining valid consent. It all kind of forms part of the aspect of data minimization, where you need to have a correct consent, for example, to know what data you need to collect from individual. And also the other the other aspect, the other side of a coin as well is I think you've got AI as well, which is another aspect where you need to feed in data. So people need to collect data, need to collect information to be able to put it through. And I think that's why with AI system rising, you see that companies would want to collect a lot of data. But the other side as well is you've got people are becoming more data aware, more more aware of what's happening, what their rights are. So what they do is you've got com people now requesting data subject access requests to understand what data has been collected, what's been happening to that data. And I've personally seen while working previous companies where you've got loads of data requests, erasure requests or data subject access requests. So people would want to understand what's happening to that data. And I think in 2022, it was about 22% data subject access requests, were putting through. Now in 20, last year, 2024, it was about 36%. So you can see that people are being more aware and people want to understand the data kind of the pathway of data where it's going. So those are the aspects I would think is being under implemented or misunderstood by a lot of companies, and that's where we need to be, I think, more glued up.
Yeah, definitely. I think data minimization that you have caught up. I think it's a thing which is catching on globally. Like even in India with the new DPDP Act, I think they're trying to minimize the amount of data people are collecting because I think the more amount of data you collect, there's a more risk of it being misused, especially if it is sensitive information. And with the privacy by design and the
Definitely.
other concepts you've discussed, I think they are quite insightful. So I think really like the response here. And so with this, I'll have my next question, which is addressed to Chetandeep. So Chetandeep, with in PIPEDA and GDPR, consent and accountability differ. So from your experience, what does this mean for North America SaaS product teams?
Okay, thank you so much for having me on board, Shashwat, once again. But yeah, coming to my question, see, when we compare privacy regulation like PIPEDA and GDPR, especially through a North American lens, we must acknowledge the different psychological and regulatory origins that shape them. See, GDPR stems from fundamental rights perspective rooted in human dignity and privacy as an enable right. But in Pipida, it is more upon the sector friendly, principle based and business first approach, reflecting Canada's attempt to balance the innovation with responsible privacy governance. Uh, Here, if we look closely at comparing the consent point of view, see, GDPR has defined consent altogether, and we all know about it. Consent should be freely given, should be informed, unambiguous. There is a granularity between consent for each purpose. Affirmation action should be given. Withdrawal mechanism should be there in GDPR. Consent being the one of the lawful basis, it sets a bar high in GDPR, and you have a must have a design architecture accordingly. But in Pipeda, if we closely look towards in depth now, it is more flexible. It allows implied consents for non-sensitive data where the purpose is obvious. It shows a conceptual test of reasonableness. If I had to look upon it deeply, if I had to look on in grossly for product thing, GDPR is designed more on the conventionality consent for checkboxes with layered privacy notices and defining the consent management platform like OneTrust or user centrics here. But in Pipeda, implied consent for the standard user interaction like collecting delivery services or transparency, giving notices, and basing giving upon the behavior tracking. But as per the behavioral tracking and the location data, which are more critical in aspects, they have to get the consent. But normal name, phone number, email address, there is no consent required, and it works upon the implied consent only. And
Yeah.
there is also difference between accountability as per there is ROPA defined, DPIA defined, DPO has a definition under GDPR, and it is had also establishment of privacy by design and default. But whereas PIPEDA has a softer touch, okay, doesn't define a DPO altogether, but it mandates a privacy officer to be done. There is no requirement for DPIA, okay, and they are majorly based upon the complaint against mechanism, which is completely slower than GDPR, and they have a little transitioning towards each other and not complementing each other. uh, it is more privacy. GDPR is more privacy by design centric. It is and PIPEDA is more towards the implied consent centric. If we have to critique a real challenge between them, yeah, that's the major difference I see both of them. But supposedly giving from a layman's point of view, these laws are perfectly complement each other with their own national legislations. So yeah, that's the current situation currently being going on in both of them. Yes.
Well, definitely, Chetan, you've given us quite a lot of information, and I think you really put it well how the comparison which you gave between the two laws. So with this, I'll have my next question, which is addressed to Zafrul. So Zafrul, for bootstrapped SaaS founders building products with global reach in mind, what's the smartest way to incorporate cross-border privacy compliance into their product roadmap from day one without overwhelming limited resources?
Thanks, Shashwat. Interesting question as well in terms of when we the thing is with GDPR, which we have to understand is it even though there's not a cap, but as a percentage of your turnover with a fine, etc. Even so, bootstrap SaaS founders, it's not a reason not to be compliant with GDPR. I think that's a common misconception or a common mistake which a lot of SaaS founders do or tend to do. And it's not their fault. It's more like you said, we're bootstrapped, so financially, money is limited to advance the product which we're putting together, which is in development. So I think that it's quite a short one for me. The short answer would be to speak to a data privacy specialist. I think because otherwise you'll end up trying to do everything, which you can't. So that could be that's one of the things which we need to sort of bear in mind. It's a bit like when you're setting up a company, you need to have your accountant to do your financial side of things. So you need to have a specialist, someone who understands data, the laws around data, the regulation around data, the global regulation about around data. So you need to speak to someone who can advise you on what they're doing. But and it's one of the things which is needed, like you said, to include it into your growth, your product roadmap. But most of the time, when you look at data privacy, it's an afterthought, mainly for like smaller, new startup SaaS companies. It's an afterthought. So they'll have a product design, and then they'll kind of try to place, it's like a puzzle, like try to place, data privacy around it to make it fit. And sometimes it doesn't fit. So it has to be implemented. That's why you've got the concept of data by design or privacy by design or by default. That's when you start with privacy in mind. And like the name suggests, data privacy by design, it needs to be implemented at the initial process. So it needs to be added to your roadmap at the beginning, at the initial conceptual stage. And also, you might get away with cutting corners. I've seen it, while working with so many companies, you might get away with cutting corners, try to, because a lot of the time companies look at data compliance as a tick box exercise. So we think, okay, I've ticked the box and that's it, it's done. So I can cut corner there. But then it comes down to bite you a lot of the time. And I've seen it, having worked with a lot of companies across different industries. I've seen it where initially when we're putting a product together, they forget or we don't kind of look into the data privacy side of things. And then later on, when it's gone to market, that's when we're having issues. And one very, very common example is in terms of a consent mechanism. So a lot of product where different jurisdictions have different way of, even within Europe, they have different way of capturing consent. And you could see companies where some for some product where you might need to have double opt-in, or one you might need to have opt-out. So this has to be built into the system, into the platform you've got or you're putting together. But like I said, the smart way I think to go about it is to speak to a data privacy specialist or an information security specialist who can advise you at the stage where you need to implement uh, data compliance and what to implement as well, which is very important. You don't want to over engineer something which where you don't need to. So there's kind of, you need to have the right balance for this.
Well, definitely, Zafrul. The balance, I think, is quite important when you're navigating cross-border privacy compliance. And with especially with privacy by design, you have to ensure that these principles are there in whatever you're developing. And this, I think, you have quite good inputs, which I think our audience will really, really appreciate. So this brings me to
Thank
my
you.
next question, which is addressed to Chetandeep. So Chetan, I have my next question to you. So the question goes as follows: while we are navigating multiple jurisdictions, how do you prioritize compliance without overwhelming engineering or legal teams?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, Shashwat. Yeah, see, when I was working with one of my clients as well and one of my CISO as well, so this explosion of privacy regulations such as GDPR, CCPA, PIPEDA, LGPD, and now DPDP Act help create a compliance maze. ठीक है? There is a centralized need that is required. So if I had to look upon it closely, we have to create a harmonized privacy and embedded operating model. In that model, we have to stabilize all the key privacy nodes from all the laws such as GDPR faces DPIA, DPO's requirement. CCPA more centers upon the opt-out mechanisms. India is more on the consent managers and consent management platform. LGPD is similar to GDPR, but the interpretation differs. And all these we have to combine all these jurisdiction into one. We have to create a global overlay and global core. When we are processing personal data, we have to create a one privacy notice. We can create a privacy centric user centric platform which we call customer relation manager platform. We can modelize the ROPA and DPA requirements as per the compliance and business needs. And accordingly, we can add the overlay of GDPR, CIPRA accordingly. And if I had to crisis altogether structure, there is a risk tired framework that we can load upon, which is more customer centric, as well as it is also defining the use of the business needs as well, because legal input is always required, but how to minimize it, that we are embedded privacy champions into each jurisdictions, and each agiting a privacy champion from engineering team, we are getting from the marketing team, we are getting from the sales team, we are getting from the analytics team. Here the legal bottleneck refuses. We can give a impart knowledge to these privacy champions and get the all the information as the requirement as per the business compliance, and accordingly automating those particular data flows and optimizing the utilization of a harmonized framework and gap identification. We can create a scalable governance cadre that defines the privacy on its full course, whether it's a growing company, whether it's all grown company, or whether it's there changing laws coming in the company or AI modifications coming in. We can create a scalable model that establishes more towards the user centric platforms and always centric towards the business compliance need as well. So here, if we don't put it at all at once, the risk mitigation is the paramount. For those privacy champions we can inbuild, we have to create an architecture of a harmonized framework. We can empower the local teams to establish their connection with legal, not directly but indirectly, and we can accordingly templates, automate and define and structure the privacy by design in altogether means.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
my
Yeah, sorry.
question to yeah,
Yeah.
and now my question to you is, Shashwat, as a privacy lawyer, okay, as a normal lawyer has been or a compliance, how you balance the needs of this compliance mechanisms, how you advise your client, what is your outcome out of it, how do you do all this?
Well, Chetan, that's a great question. And honestly, it's about mindset and workflow. I tell founders to treat privacy by design like baking a cake. So you bake it early and
Okay,
make it a part of your product DNA. When I am advising my
okay,
clients, I tell them to create lightweight, scalable compliance frameworks tailored to their growth stage. Instead of slowing them down,
okay,
I try to make it actually in a way that it helps them move faster. Because when privacy is embedded into an API structure, the contracts, user flows, they don't need to pause. My clients don't need to pause and panic every time they launch in a new market because they're already compliant.
okay,
So in this case, they are able to use trust as a growth leverage and not a blocker, and they're able to scale with confidence and not with just cross fingers.
okay. Great, that's nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Chetan. And with this, I will ask my next question to Zafrul. So, Zafrul, in vendor management lifecycle, what does an ideal GDPR compliant model look like for fast scaling SaaS?
Thanks, Rashwat. Yes, when you look at sort of, the life cycle for GDPR and especially for scaling SaaS ecosystem, there's numerous of points I would say you need to consider. The first thing is to have well-defined terms when you when you have, say, for example, your vendors, to understand what the relationship would be. Is your vendor going to be a co-controller of a data processor? So you understand the relationship you have, and also you you have that well defined in an agreement. It could be a data sharing agreement, for example. This should be in place, and you'll have a you explain the key differences for data processor, for example, is limited to what we can use with the data. But whereas a co-controller is different, they can use the data for other things as well. So you have to have this well defined, well detailed into your data sharing agreement with them. And also the other aspect when you look at data transfer, data storage as well, this is ideally you want the data to be if a data is if it's a European country, you want the data to be held within UK or EEA, for example. And if the data is going to be sent to other jurisdictions, you need to make sure you have a correct sort of framework in place. You've seen Shrimps as well, what is done to data when being transferred internationally to other jurisdiction. So this is something which needs to be implemented at an initial stage and parts of a life cycle as well. So to be able to understand if you okay, if I need to understand, and we're moving to the world is becoming a global village now. So data you can't stop it. Data would be transferred everywhere. So you need to understand what the correct agreement that should be in place, and there should be those correct safeguards in place. And also, like so, with so it's been mentioned, it's been something which is quite constant as well when you look at data transfer. You need to have a transfer mechanism in place. You need to understand how to classify the data. This is also another aspect which people tend to ignore. If a data is high risk or if it's special category data, for example, being transferred, you need to have, for example, medical data could be transferred, internationally to other jurisdictions. So you need to have a correct um, assessment in place. You could do a DPI, for example. And once you've done the data protection impact assessment, you'll understand what are the risks or with the transfer of that data. So you can identify the risk. You can, understand what are the mitigation. So you're going to be put in place. And another point as well, which I think tends to be overlooked, is to ensure that was vendors they cascade their terms to their subcontractors. A lot of the times you see if you engage especially like a principal third party vendor to help you with the provision of a service, they have also vendors, they have also subcontractors. So you need to make sure the terms you've got with that vendor is being cascaded to other subcontractors or sub vendors within that chain. So this is, I think, one thing which can be included as part of a data protection agreement or data transfer agreement. And also the other another sort of, another point I would mention also, we need to ensure that as part of the agreement where we have large data sets or sensitive data being shared, we it's being used for that particular purpose. It's all part of the agreement. We need maybe to have extra safeguards in place. For example, after the use of that data, after the service has been provided, the data could be erased, and we could get confirmation, for example, that the data has been erased. Sometimes they can have a data set separated from the main from other data as well. So it's easy to go in and delete the data from the system. I've seen so many systems working with so many companies. I've seen so many systems in place where they've got the backup, they can identify the backup. You've got so many tools now. OneTrust, I think, offers a similar tool as well. Or you've got in-house built tools as well where you can identify where the data has gone, like have a data map, and also it's easy even to delete those data. So there are other obligations as well, but we won't go into it now. But there are other obligations as well, which forms part of GDPR, and which is applicable to in the life cycle of a product, if you want. And I think this somehow the list is much longer, but these are the kind of key points which I wanted to iterate as part of this. But and if you're getting this right, the other bits kind of fall into place like a puzzle. It would fall into place, but you need to have the main bits correct first, and then this will fall into place. If you have a smaller bits, as per se, would fall into place.
Well, definitely, Zafrul. I think it's a very good way that you've put forward with this.
Yeah, I was getting to that. So with that in mind as well, Shashwat, you've worked with many startup, you've helped them navigate or put together a compliance structure in place. So what's one mistake or few mistakes you see that happens again and again, which even though we've had to learn from it from the beginning, and then we do it again.
Zafrul, one of the most common mistakes I see is treating privacy compliance as a checkbox activity or worse, an afterthought. Founders, I found that they often localize their applications in new countries and assume that a generic privacy policy or a quick DPA plugin will suffice. But in my experience, cross-border compliance isn't just about paperwork. It's about understanding the expectations of each jurisdiction. An example would be that GDPR emphasizes purpose limitation and transparency, while in Canada with the PIPEDA, it focuses more on accountability and meaningful consent. I feel that if you're not building privacy in your architecture from the ground up through principles of privacy by design, you're going to spend a lot more time fixing it later at the cost of both trust and velocity. And I think that SaaS founders should specifically ensure that, as with all compliances, that they're compliance with privacy, whatever frameworks are applicable to them from the beginning itself. So thank you for the question. And this brings us to the
Definitely.
last question to Chetandeep. So, Chetandeep, often best practices in cross-border broader data breaches are overlooked. And as per, what do you think happens, especially when dealing with regulators in Canada and EU?
Okay. Actually, I'll tell you. I'll give you an example on this one. I was working with one of the multinational healthcare uh, tech headquarters in Europe, operating across North America. They used a popular US-based cloud platform, let's say Salesforce, for their CRM. So data from EU, including healthcare related services, was stored in EU servers only. In that case, Now we had a scenario where GDPR required adequate protection and transfer mechanism for personal data, but US law doesn't allow access to data via via if they it's outside of US. So it created a little I would say a little tricky situation for us to overlook that. But yeah, then we adopted a multi-layer strategy where legal, tech, and organizational need was met. We executed a SCC on that particular aspect under the EU Commission 2021 model. Then we carried out TIA for under risk under the US law, categories and data involved, and all the data process between the US citizens era. Then we identified and redrafted the DPA clauses to ensure the transparency and data being stored outside the US notification as well. We stored data stored in CRM was synonymized before uploaded. Direct names identifiers were removed, and key mapping keys were stored in a separate server of EU. We added encryption in transit and encryption at rest as well. We ensured role-based access be implemented altogether to support the team. We segregated the sensitive data and maintained access logs to demonstrate the compliance for this non-sensitive and sensitive data. Now, accordingly, there was some conflictions coming from the team, but as per my previous answers, we highlighted a harmonized framework based upon GDPR only. See, GDPR is common thread between all the aspects. The law will differ, engineering teams will differ, but the end motive is the compliance requirement. We created a dynamic record keeping process. We created a vendor conflicts clauses. We created a proper I would say architectural of data being kept and being stored, and categorizing the requirement of SCCs, BCRs if needed, and we were keeping a shorthand angles of data being kept in an environment not in the US but in EU, and they ensure that these data of the US citizens are also safe in our EU regions as well. So that is why we highlighted basically on transparency, highlighting the proportionately dealing with the data transfer mechanisms and designing a proactive approach to engage the compliance need met accordingly. Yes.
Well, that is, I really like this example of how you were able to ensure compliance and, how you were like that entire journey was actually quite insightful.
Yeah. Yes.
So with
Yeah.
this, I would like to thank you for joining us today. And I think we
Okay.
had a great session today where we spanned over GDPR nuances, PIPEDA pragmatism, and the real world balancing act between scaling fast and staying compliant. Zafrul, thank you so much for demystifying the complexities around vendor management and cross border data transfers. Your practical lens on embedding privacy into the product roadmap gave our listeners real tools to act on. Chetandeep, your global perspective, especially navigating the tension between overlapping laws, was invaluable. And your emphasis on building trust and accountability was not just about compliance, but it is a message that every tech team needs to hear. To all our listeners, whether you are launching your first SaaS product or managing privacy across borders, remember privacy isn't a blocker, it's a competitive advantage when done right. And it starts by making it a part of your architecture, culture, and conversations from day one. Until next time, stay curious, stay compliant, and keep building responsibility. This is the sixth episode of Fireside Chats on tech, privacy, and AI. And I'm your host, Shashwat Jindal. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, Ashwat.
Thank you, Shashwat. Yeah, I